From the studio that has won no awards whatsoever comes the podcast that should have already been canceled. Welcome to another episode of Have You Read This? A podcast for bookworms, lovers of sarcasm, and those dangerously close to overdosing on caffeine. Load up on ibuprofen, because here comes 15 minutes of your life you'll never be able to get back.
In the interest of not bogging down your ear holes with as much useless crap as I normally do, I'm going to give it a shot and try to get to the point here as quickly as I can. But you got to remember, that's kind of tough for me. I'm old, I'm grumpy, I'm forgetful, and I like to talk. I'm also old and grumpy and forgetful. But how about I skip all of this nonsense and get directly to the point, which is Coffin Moon by Keith Rosson.
Everything hurts, always. Sorrow, vengeance, even joy. Everything's got teeth.
Coffin Moon was published the first week of September 2025, I think, September 9th. Who cares what the exact date is? And yes, it's about vampires. And I need to preface this by saying I usually avoid anything about vampires. Movies, books, you name it. And I don't know why. I can't really give you a valid reason. I can't explain it other than to say that it's just not my thing. Kind of like barbecue. I don't hate barbecue, but I don't ever crave it. And since I don't ever crave it, I really kind of don't think about it. So you'll never hear me saying, whoa, we really need to go get barbecue tonight. Same thing with vampires. Probably won't ever see me say something along the lines of, I really got to go get a great vampire novel. However, having loved Fever House and the sequel, The Devil by Name, so much, I just couldn't imagine living in a world where Mr. Rosson would let me down by writing a crappy novel, even if it was about vampires. And obviously he succeeded, or I wouldn't be devoting my time and wasting your time talking about books. The story is set in 1975, takes place in Portland, Oregon, and the main characters, at least the ones that we're concerned the most with, I would say, are Dwayne Minor and his 13-year-old niece, Julia. Minor is a bartender, and they live in an apartment above the bar. And the synopsis in part says things aren't easy, but Minor is scraping by. And I think to say things aren't easy is putting it mildly, because how this whole family came to be is a story in and of itself. And none of it is pretty, which really is another reason why I love Rosson's books. And I'm not going to get into the whole detail of backstory. Every single review almost on Goodreads, you can go read the synopsis over and over again. I don't know why people do that. Stop it. Say what you like about the book. Don't repeat the synopsis. It's already up there. Anyway, back to more about the synopsis. I got to mention some of these things, okay? So I'm not going to repeat the whole synopsis. So I'm not as dumb as the people that do that. But anyway, it says, then a vampire walks into his bar and ruins his life. Minor meets a vampire named John Varley, who ends up murdering Minor's wife, Heidi. And it wasn't something like a gunshot or a stabbing or a car accident. Oh, no, not in Mr. Rosson's world. Poor Heidi met a brutal and violent end, just the way that people stand up as soon as the plane lands should. Again, I'm not going to get into details. You can read all of this stuff on the synopsis, so I'm not giving spoilers. The bulk of the story is what happens when Minor and Julia decide they're not going to tolerate this and they're going to go get revenge. And that's where we go deeper and deeper down the vampire rabbit hole, where we encounter such wonderful things as undead children, silver bullets, and yes, other vampires. And the synopsis wraps things up and it says, gritty, unforgettable, and emotionally devastating. Coffin Moon asks what will be left of our humanity when grief transmutes into violence, when monsters wear human faces, and when our thirst for revenge eclipses everything else. And I know what you're thinking. This could easily describe politics at the moment. But no, this is about finding and killing vampires. It's a revenge story. When I read Fever House, I just loved Rosson's writing. To this day, One of my favorite reviews of that book, it just said something simple like this. It said, "This book is metal." I think that applies to Coffin Moon as well. So this sits around 320 pages, but it reads fast. In fact, it felt like a novella, little short story. Did not feel the length of 320 pages. And as I finished chapter after chapter, I just had this feeling in my gut. I was worried that at some point the book would turn to garbage, or there would be some type of a letdown, and I would go from thinking, oh, another 5-star book from Rosson. And I was so worried that it would turn from that into like a 2-star or something. I was worried like maybe he couldn't write 3 great books in a row. Maybe those 2 were a fluke, and then this one is the one where it's like, okay, here's where the guy let you down. But I'm so glad that never happened. And it's gotten to the point now where if you put his name on a book, I'm not even going to read the synopsis. You just give it to me and I'll read it. So here's what I really loved about it. I thought the plot was great. Rosson drops you right into this world that's of unease, of turmoil. You don't get this perfect sitcom family whose favorite kid failed an exam. You get far from that. These characters are fleshed out enough to help this story, but he doesn't weigh you down with unnecessary details. Just tell me enough so that I can get a handle on these people, and then let's just keep things moving. That's where Rosson excels. It's almost like this dude has some kind of magic formula that guides him on just the right amount of info to give. And it's this formula that keeps you hanging on. It keeps you in suspense. It keeps you excited to keep turning pages. Coffin Moon would certainly be filed under horror and thriller, and it's got plenty of graphicness. So for you nutcases like me that like that kind of stuff, this has got plenty of it. But while it's violent and gory, I would say in all the right ways, it stops there. It doesn't cross the line of horror where it dips into extreme horror or splatterpunk. So it gives you just the right amount. See, again, Mr. Rosson with his little magic formula. And I also don't think he gives us a typical vampire story. And not that I would really know what a typical vampire story is. I don't know. Maybe I should have said cliche, but none of his work is typical, and I certainly wouldn't classify it as cliche. If it were, I would have stopped at Fever House and then forgotten his name forever, just like the entire world should do with Jake and Logan Paul. But what about the ending? Tell me about the ending. Did the ending make the book or did it ruin it? I will say I did love how this ended. Whenever I finish a book and I have doubts about the ending that the author chose or whatever, I try to imagine what I would have done different with the story had I written it. So I'd gotten it all the way to that point, and then what's the way I would want it ended? And I thought Rosson wrapped this one up nicely. Not just nicely, perfectly. Whole time I kept thinking, this is the type of story that should make its way to the big screen. I would absolutely go see this in theaters. It would be gory and fun, wild and fast paced. And this would be kind of one of those things where I could imagine fans being a little bit protective of like, okay, the book was good. And I swear if you morons screw this movie up and taint the memory that I have of this thing, I'm going to murder all of you like some of these people in this book. So I promised you a little bit shorter review, shorter than previous at least. And that was it. I don't have anything bad to say about Coffin Moon, and if you do, you're an idiot. What I am trying to do is also kick out a little bit more shorter form reviews on TikTok and Instagram, and hopefully the 5 of you that follow me have noticed that. Chances are that you haven't. That's okay. Before I end this episode, however, I did want to mention something kind of cool. I hit my reading goal for the year, and I had set my goal at 75 books. I'm now at like 76, and there was a part of me that thought, great, I don't have to read anything for the rest of the year now if I don't want to. I thought about changing the goal, upping it to 100. But when I look back on those years where I was trying to read 100 books, I got too hung up in the numbers. I would start reading shorter books, knowing that it would take me less time to get through them. And I don't want pressure to read any specific amount because I think that takes away the joy of reading. Now that I've got my goal behind me, I'm excited to read a couple other books that have really been staring at me for far too long. Like I just now picked up East of Eden, and I'm pretty stoked to start digging in to that one. And then there's a couple suggestions that people have thrown out after they watched my video on the little book challenge that I've got going on Instagram. All right, here's your assignment. Go buy Coffin Moon by Keith Rosson. Read it and enjoy it. And remember that if you don't feel like this is like a 4 or 5 star book, you're an idiot. Until next time.
All these past selves laid to waste, cut down by time and circumstance and choices made. He didn't know who he was in this moment, what was left.